So today we're going to be looking at, I guess, where Tokyo Ghoul fell off, where it kind of went downhill, and it's more so going to be centered around the final arc of the story, looking at some of the weird missteps and just unanswered questions or things that just didn't really feel right regarding that final arc or the dragon arc. And I guess for reference or for clarification, Ishida did release a letter after the series finished, kind of confirming how he felt about the story and as a creator in a whole, and he was basically stuck. He was in a rut, he was burnt out, and he realistically didn't really want to create anything anymore and gave himself a very strict time limit of 6 months, something that he was very apologetic about, at least on Twitter, where he apologized to his editors and the publisher and the magazine and everything like that because he pushed that 6-month time limit. I always say that he found solace in ending his story, not necessarily the way he wanted to, but because more so it was coming to a conclusion and that he was kind of free of his burden. He was free of the cage that he kind of encapsulated himself in, which is somewhat more or less his words in his letter. I keep pointing people back to that video just to give a bigger picture of Ishida and how he felt, so I have made a video if you do evidently want to go check it out. There's a lot of things that happened in the final arc that had us scratching our heads. Well, what's going on? Without a doubt, in my mind, at least in my opinion, that the dragon arc or the final arc of the story of Tokyo Ghoul is probably the worst one. There's a lot of interesting directions that Ishida took that, I guess, now that we know how he felt and why he kind of went the way he did, was to ultimately cut corners and try and bring his story to a conclusion as best as he could. And you can definitely see the result of this. Now that we know, you can see him struggling to, I guess, cut corners very heavily and ultimately at the loss of some very interesting character development, some interesting stories, and overall potentially cutting the story short at least 100 chapters in my opinion. Don't get me wrong, the dragon arc was definitely very climatic. It definitely did feel like a final arc. However, there was a lot of things that was left unexplained, and the overall grand scale and caliber of what Dragon was ultimately felt flushed out. It felt really short and belittling for such a massive monumental event, considering the world was even involved. The Japanese military was involved. Such a what seems to be quote-unquote alien life form just randomly destroying a massive portion of a city has no global coverage whatsoever. We only seen the small dents of what this massive event actually gave to the world, right? And how the world reacted to it, because the world doesn't know about ghouls. The public eye realistically doesn't know about ghouls. So when you see this massive byproduct birthing tool that is incredibly complex and massive and just destroying buildings and killing innocent human beings, like the first thought in your mind is going to be aliens. It's going to be a monster, an alien, or something went wrong. Like, what is this beast? There was a news coverage over it. The world should know about this, but you ultimately don't get to see that. You don't get to see how the world reacts to it. And I think that was very important for Ishida to kind of lay out, considering now when you look at the events of what it was, like I said, it feels very small. It feels like no one really knows about it and they just forgot about it. There was no real countermeasures for it. It's very confusing to me, and I feel like this was the first mishap in the final arc because it kind of led on to a lot of different things, and it was, I guess you can say, like, the scale of it is the blanket that covers the entire story, and all the things underneath that blanket just ultimately had the exact same effect, getting cut short and not having the said impact that it should have had. Now for me, I feel like this change happened around about 125, the very infamous sex chapter between Kaneki and Toka, but I believe this was specifically put into the story just in case Ishida wanted to take the direction that he did, with the ending and Toka being pregnant. I don't necessarily believe that that was his final choice going off of 125. He could have put the chapter in and kind of left it like that, like they've just had sex and that kind of bring them closer as a couple, obviously, but Toka didn't necessarily have to be pregnant. Even if she did, the chapter itself kind of helps open up the opportunity to push forward a different ending, which is where I believe the story started to go, and Ishida specifically made that choice to write that chapter and show us, just in case he wanted to take a different approach. Maybe he had it in the back of his mind when he wrote that chapter and thinking that, I'm getting burnt out, I don't know how much time I have left writing this story, and it could have ultimately turned out like that. But I feel like it started there. When you kind of push forward, there's a lot of little individual time skips in there that just progress the story, bit by bit, and you kind of lose traction of time, right? Especially when you get into like the compound raid, because this is where it kind of all unravels and everything kind of kicks into high gear. You have a lot of different people coming into the story. You have what was a seemingly interesting idea of Furuta kind of manipulating and I guess pushing ghouls underground, basically making above ground a big military zone. So if ghouls were captured above ground, they would be slaughtered and killed. That aspect was a very interesting idea. It was hardly ever played on, but I found that concept very interesting, even though it only lasted like a couple of chapters. You move on to the raid, which introduced a new character known as Ko, who, remember, was very unique. He had this interesting thing where he could only use one ghoul eye and then both ghoul eyes, and he was kind of like this mixed hybrid situation. I feel like Ko as a character was heavily undermined and not played upon to the extent that he could have been. I'm not too sure how much more you could have fleshed out Ko, but he definitely seemed like a character that could have been played upon a lot more. I think the fights as well that took place in the compound raid were very small and minimalistic when they could have been fleshed out a lot more, but we know Ishida as not being the most coherent writer when it comes to battles or fights, tends to skip over a lot of stuff, and not every story has to have, you know, fighting sequences or battle phases, whatever, but a lot of this stuff is very important to see, and a lot of the fights ultimately got skipped over. There was a lot of emphasis on the Renji Yomo and Matsuki situation with Aura. Then there was obviously the situation with Yui coming into play, which was heavily undermined as well, because Yui was kind of like this person that was manipulated by Furuta, but at the same time had this like warped moral compass at the time because he wanted a result. So he himself was very conflicted, especially when he had to come up against like Hiriko and whatnot, as well as the children. So it was a very conflictive motive, if you will, especially with Ko there kind of going through and destroying everyone. It seemed heavily undermined. A lot of stuff was skipped over, and those fights felt very flat looking back at them. And then you push forward to one of the biggest events, a very climatic moment with Toka and Hinami being pushed to the limit, getting pushed all the way into a corner, right, by two very, very powerful characters, Suzuya and Hanbi, and all hope is lost. You know, you have a beautiful sequence with Hinami going pretty full out and almost sacrificing herself to save Toka. That in itself was a really well done situation, but when Kaneki comes back into play, because mind you, all of the heavy hitters, all of the big powerhouse hitters are out scavenging for food. Kaneki comes back because of a feeling, and he saves Hinami just in time. Not too bad. Unfortunately, you don't necessarily get to see the results or the hard work that Hinami put in, almost sacrificing herself, when we skip over the fight between Kaneki and Suzuya and Hanbi, right? At the time, we didn't necessarily have to see that, but looking back on it, it's kind of like, yeah, that was definitely necessary. Because when I think about it now, I'm like, well, all that hard work and effort that Hinami put into stopping Suzuya and Hanbi and slowing them both down, right, as well as the small interactions that Toka had in that fight as well, ultimately gets pushed back because we don't even get to see the fight between Kaneki and Suzuya, and that actually affects it heavily. I know a lot of people don't really think like that, but it does. We skipped that fight completely, and I don't know why Ishida was going with that direction, unless he was trying to, I guess, magnetize the effect of Kaneki going into a full Kaguya for the first time, because he never has. He's always teased the border of it, but never actually shown it. And what an interesting fight that would have been. Like, that fight would have been amazing. Kaneki, you know, going toe-to-toe with Suzuya, a very, very powerful character, as well as Hanbi, who holds his own as well, both in Arata armors. Like, that would have been an incredible fight, but you skip over it completely. You go to the point of Kaneki turning into dragon. It all happens extremely fast, almost like it was cut out on purpose, just so you could force the dragon arc into the story, you know, have it run for a decent amount of time. This is when dragon comes into play, obviously, which, mind you, in my opinion, was explained very thickly. It almost felt like Ishida was kind of just riding in a circle when it came to explaining dragon fully, because at the end of the day, does anyone really know what Rize was and how Kaneki was able to be pulled out of dragon and yet still be alive? Obviously, the healing factor and the RC cells and the fact that he was completely changed, that's all great and dandy, right? But when it comes to what dragon was and what it was producing, what it was doing to the world, it was never really fully fleshed out or explained. Dragon is, you know, a birthing product. It is a tool. It's not necessarily a monster. Kaneki is not dragon, right? Kaneki is a thing that creates dragon, right? Dragon is not necessarily a living being, but more so a tool or a living organ, literally, to give birth to another being, right? And this is where the confliction comes in. This is where people get confused, because Kaneki is not dragon. In a lot of different instances, they could have recreated what Kaneki is and used that to give birth to dragon. But for some reason, Kaneki, most likely because he was already fused with Rize, and the fact that he was human to a small degree and he was turned into a ghoul, kind of makes it insinuated that, you know, he was the only option, but it was never really clarified. It was never necessarily the only option, because they do mention like a bunch of other nucleus or nuclei that were exactly the same as Kaneki. So it was kind of like, did Kaneki spawn and then he spawned other nuclei that was the clones of himself, or were there other characters that kind of merged with Kaneki at the same time? You had Kaneki turn into this dragon, and then you had like another character turn into dragon, and they merged together to create one. I don't think that's how it went. Like I'm saying, that was never really fleshed out. In my head, it was kind of like, oh, there's other nuclei other than Kaneki, and it was like, well, it's most likely just the clone of Kaneki that were being created, and they were used as kind of like holsters, you know what I mean? Placeholders, if you will, and Kaneki was the real body. So moving on from that, mind you, the way they found Kaneki was very funny as well, because it all came down to the ring he was wearing. I don't know if anyone felt any type of way about that, but that just seemed very odd. Not only that, the knowledge and survivability of being pulled out of dragon is unknown to us, considering the dragon prior, you know, Naga Serpent, we know little to nothing about. The whole setup for the Naga Serpent was never played upon. I hope people realize this. We never went back to that. It was set up, obviously, to show us that something big was coming, like the Naga Serpent, but we don't know how the V organization handled the Naga Serpent. We don't know what happened to the person that was ultimately killed in the Naga Serpent or pulled out of the Naga Serpent by the underground ghouls or whatever. I don't think we ever found out if that Naga Serpent was able to turn humans into ghouls or produce, you know, the same things or qualities as what this dragon was, you know, what Rize was doing. I found that very odd, and that really belittled the V organization's motives as well as their history, considering you get to a point with the V organization that is so interesting but ultimately comes to nothing, right? But I'll get onto that in a sec. Before that, you bring in a character, you know, that is so profound to the story, that is so intertwined with Kaneki and the story of Tokyo Ghoul, known as Eto Yoshimura, and you bring her back as this monstrous being that is able to do like this sonic boom type wave, which is nothing we've never seen before. There's a whole confliction with her returning. You find out it's actually her, but then she's dead, or something happens to her. I don't know what. It seemed like she died right at the end when you see her laying on the ground, right? What was the point, is my question. Like, why bring her back if you were never going to explain how she got brought back? Then it comes down to, you know, was Ishida going to play on it? So that completely belittled her character. You should have left her dead. That could have been Haru, and it would have been the exact same effect. It just kind of gave this false sense of hope, like, oh, Eto's here, you know, Eto's back, she's bigger and better than ever, but no, she wasn't. Then you wrap in this V organization that, mind you, has never been played upon in the entirety of the story. Only small snippets of the V organization throughout the entirety of the series. Ultimately, the first time they introduced as a villain, which is the finale of the story, funny enough, and they are played upon as this massive conglomerate that's super fucking powerful, that managed to take down another dragon, you know, and work with the CCG and the Washu family. Yeah, nah, they're gone. They're dead. The first time they introduced as a villain, they're gone. They weren't even a villain. They got, I guess, outplayed and belittled by a ragtag team of people that have never worked together before, ghouls and CCG. You telling me that's the ultimate combo to take down this V organization that's a massive conglomerate, theoretically should be, that took out the Washu family, a massive competitor that have been slaying ghouls for hundreds if not thousands of years maybe? Even the V organization should date back all the way then. But as soon as they come into the story as a villain, they get outplayed, and the whole scale of what V was throughout the entirety of the story, being this mysterious organization, is nothing, right? Kaiko having this super interesting ability, if it was that, it was never explained, where he could reanimate and bring people back from the dead. I don't know what if it was his ability, I don't know if it was a drug or if it was something else entirely, but you know, there was a couple of characters there, like Koma and the other woman, where they were back, they were dead, and he brought them back. I don't know how it worked, and it was never explained, but it doesn't matter because Kaiko died, or whatever. He was outplayed again. There was literally no point in telling us that he could do that. There was no point in telling us that he could bring back people from the dead or reanimate them, or, you know, use them as a puppet, if you will. That leads us to the big final situation, because I'm not going to talk about the final chapter, right? Kaneki, Furuta, and Rize. Furuta was ultimately pretty well done, in my opinion. Unfortunately, it felt extremely forced and extremely quick. Just so you guys know, I'm not even going to mention Ayato because that situation was garbage to begin with. I still think it's garbage, and it's kind of the most forced kind of way to implement a scapegoat for Kaneki. Mind you, Ayato being stuck in Dragon, Kaneki drowning in Dragon, yet Ayato does not also drown in Dragon. He's strong enough even though this virus is affecting him. Okay, we're not going to talk about that. I think Furuta was evidently well done, but it was extremely short. I like the idea that you didn't really know what Furuta was and what he felt like and how he thought, which I think made him a more complex and interesting character to connect to. And then you get this idea that all he wanted was a happy family. When you have all this bad stuff kind of come crumbling down all in order, basically, which is everything that I've talked about, Furuta's ideal seems very forced. At the end of the day, I liked it. I know a lot of people have mixed opinions about it, but I rather enjoyed it, and I felt like it would have been really well done in an ending that fit and tailored around that situation, instead of just kind of steamrolling through absolutely everything. Not to mention the Uta and Renji fight, as well as the clowns, which have been this massive staple of the Tokyo Ghoul story, just ultimately getting washed out as well. Mind you, I don't even want to mention the clowns. That shit was ugh. Not only that, Kaneki comes to the aspect of these crazy new abilities, which are so profound and complex that kind of question what he is now. Like, does he have all the Kagane types? Is he something else entirely? Does he age? Is he gonna die quicker? Like, what's the go? That's never explained. You get to see Furuta's full Kagura for the first time, which was really cool, but it could have been lengthier, and then it would have been a lot cooler. It would have had a lot more impact in the fact that he was, going through the process of using his full Kagura. The only problem I had is that as soon as he went into his full Kagura, he lost control. And that was always kind of teased but never played upon. I would have loved it if there was a little bit more time in between there to watch him slowly lose control in the full Kagura state and become more aggressive and just out of control. You know what I mean? Like, just lose it entirely, and then that's what would have made him slip up. I don't know how powerful Kaneki is meant to be, but he went up against Furuta with a full Kagura in a form that I guess wasn't considered a Kagura at all. Kaneki was just using his abilities and being very profound with it. I don't know, it's hard to explain, but I guess it doesn't matter at this point. And then you move on to Rize. And Rize was the biggest disappointment for me. Someone that has played such a vital role to the story since day one. Such a vital role. Everything's coming full circle. It starts with Rize and Kaneki, it ends with Rize and Kaneki. Unfortunately, it only ends with Rize, because for some reason, as much as Dragon is a birthing tool, creating Rize from literally nothing, forcing her, being connected to hundreds of thousands, if not millions of RC cells that are just directly flowing through her and into her body, right? Because she's still connected, ultimately gets killed by Kaneki. The thing is, there was no conclusion to their reunion. There was no conclusion to Rize, because she just died, realistically. She didn't even say anything. At least I don't think. The text there was a little bit weird at points and people didn't really know. And then that's it. End of story. There was no repercussion for killing Rize. There was no repercussion for destroying Dragon, or at least dismantling the heart of it. End of story. I guess the only repercussion was that it all came crashing down on Kaneki, but then comes forth the very forceful Ayato savior. And that's it. This video has been long enough as it is, and I definitely have missed a lot of stuff that have, I guess, led to this being the quote-unquote worst arc of the story. I very well believe that this arc could have been absolutely incredible. It could have been such a game-changing arc for, manga creators and Tokyo Ghoul, and it could have been literally the best arc in the story if Ishida went the way he wanted to. If Ishida didn't feel pressured to end his story, and if he had the, I guess, will to continue to finish his story and create it and see it to its end, that may be how he originally wanted it to. I don't blame him for this, obviously. Unfortunately, he was burnt out. He's been working hard for 7 years, and I got a lot of respect for him. I really do. In my eyes, the final arc could have been absolutely incredible. There was so much promise there. Looking back on it, it was such a phenomenal thing. And I really wished that arc could have been the pinnacle of Tokyo Ghoul and Tokyo Ghoul Re. I really do. So that's basically it. Let me know what you guys loved or hated about the final arc of Tokyo Ghoul Re. I apologize that this video is so fucking long. I didn't mean for it to be so long, but there's a lot of stuff we had to talk about, and I still missed a lot of stuff, so there you go. With that being said, I'm actually going to end the video for you. I hope you guys enjoyed. Don't forget to subscribe. I would greatly appreciate it. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.